Hey, it's Alicia, and this is another episode of our nervous system patterns series, an exploration of all the ways our nervous system can dictate our behavior in life, often below the level of our awareness. And today, we're talking about the nervous system pattern of victimization, or playing the victim. And right off the bat, I want to give a disclaimer here that I have had, and probably still have to some degree, some judgment of this pattern. It's a difficult one for me to be with. I think when I've explored this a lot, often people say what you judge in others, you're disowning in yourself. And I don't buy that for me with this. What comes up for me the most, this is what just feels true to me, is that I have as much right as anyone to play the victim card, to victimize myself to life circumstances and the trauma that happened in my life. In particular, when I was a teenager. I'm going to give a really quick recap of that story here, because I'm going to talk about it a little bit in this video, but it's not meant to be the full story. If you're interested in that full story, for some reason you're new here or you don't know my story, you can either find it on my blog, on the About section of mobilitymastery.com, or we'll link to a video series where I talk about the trauma that I experienced as a teenager. But basically, a 30-year-old man targeted me when I was 13 years old and psychologically groomed me for about 6 months, turned me against my family, kind of won their, friendship or, at least goodwill, and then proceeded to basically do whatever he wanted with me sexually, psychologically, in very manipulative, abusive ways for 2.5 years. He was an alcoholic, a drug addict, was physically violent several times around me, and this whole thing lasted about 2.5 years. Until I realized I had to get out of that situation or I might die. So that's something that I went through. And I definitely believe, I could play the victim card in life if I wanted to. That's a really intense thing to go through. Some of the ways that I've described it before are like being kidnapped and then repeatedly raped for 2.5 years, but then there's so much more that goes into it. It mostly did a number on my psyche, on my psychology, where I couldn't trust anyone, even myself, for a very long time. So I've never really played the victim card. There's maybe one victim thread or story that I've been able to uncover in myself, but it never felt right to call myself a victim. Anytime I entertained the idea of calling myself a victim and him the perpetrator, or calling myself a survivor even, I've never used that word. It never felt right, because the minute I use that word, I think words are really powerful. There's often a lot of emotion attached to words, and then a lot of meaning. And those, the emotion and meaning that we attach to words can often then dictate our behavior. And, often at this nervous system level that we're talking about. And at the nervous system level, it just didn't feel right, because the minute I would, think, am I a victim or am I a survivor? I instantly felt small. I felt disempowered. I felt like I should blame someone, and that didn't feel healthy. I started reading Buddhist books when I was 17 and did a whole thing of following the Eightfold Path for a while. And, I'm definitely not, I don't ascribe to Buddhism so much anymore. But, as soon as I could explore these concepts, I was exploring them, and I never wanted to play the victim. I never wanted to poison myself with blame, right? And I had a lot of stuff, way more things to heal, right? So I'm not claiming I was just fine after what I went through and that it was no big deal, not at all. It's been my life story to heal from this. I'm just saying that victimization and the nervous system pattern of that never really was a thing for me. So the one thread, I mentioned it, and so I want to out myself here. The one thread that I've uncovered that is something I can point to, or that's a little victim-y, and that was in me for a while. is one of the signs and symptoms. So I'm about to go into the signs and symptoms, and maybe I'll call this number one. But it was feeling or believing, pretty much waking up every day for a long time in my late teens and then 20s, feeling like something, the world, the universe, God, people, something, some unseen force was conspiring against me to prevent me from finding whatever it was I wanted to find to heal myself. So this is really interesting, right? And ironic, because as soon as I could go on a path of healings, at 17, as soon as I had that urge, I wanted to find answers to things. So I was very committed to healing, but for a really long time, things didn't come to me quickly. Like I didn't find things that helped me in a profound way for years. And so I had this story running that there's something, like I believed other people were getting, the answers and getting the help they needed and finding the right book or the right teacher or the right therapist or whatever. And something was conspiring against me to keep me stuck in my trauma. So if that sounds like you, then chances are you're running some kind of victimization nervous system pattern. But I want to go into the other signs and symptoms now as well. So obviously, some people really know they're playing the victim. So if you already know that, then obviously that's in your awareness, and that's one of the signs and symptoms, is if you're aware of it. So that would be number two. If you're aware that you're playing the victim, that you see it play out in your life. Number three would be finding yourself blaming others often. So this can show up in seemingly minute ways, but if you really examine yourself with honesty, you might find that it's showing up more than you think if you have this pattern. So obviously, maybe blaming, if you actually went through something like I did, or some kind of abuse or trauma, then it makes sense, right? That you would blame the perpetrator or blame the predator or blame the person who did it to you. But it can also show up in, blaming a loved one, a partner, blaming, your parents, blaming, even if they weren't involved in whatever it was, blaming God, blaming your boss, right? Blaming maybe, even I've actually seen this play out. And I think it's okay for me to say this. Stefan, my man and partner, he has this pattern. And one of the things that I've noticed with him, that's a seemingly small thing, but it does show up. And so I think it's an interesting thing to point out here is that, he might be cooking and he's using a cast iron pan and he has it up too high and it starts smoking. And then he'll be like, what the fuck? And he'll say it as if like the pan is conspiring against him, right? To like somehow, like it wasn't his fault. So hopefully it's okay that I said that. But little things like that. So you might blame your car for breaking down, right? Even though like maybe you didn't change the oil. I don't know. So there's a tendency to blame other people rather than take responsibility. So the tagline of this one is when you feel safer to blame others, then take personal accountability. Number four is going to be a jumping off of the last one. So if you tend towards, blaming others and that feels good and righteous and right and just, then chances are really high that you've also joined a group of people who like to blame bigger things, other things. So what I didn't mention in the last one is you might blame the system. You might blame, the healthcare system. You might blame the government. You might blame your community, your church. I don't know, but some system, right? So it's not a person or even like a couple people or a group of people. It's a system. So if you find yourself blaming a system or a group of people, for example, and I might catch a lot of heat for this, I refuse to join the Me Too movement. I could. I have the credentials, right? But while I do think that we need to raise awareness about trauma and sexual trauma and maybe some of the disconnection or disparity between masculine and feminine, men and women, I refuse to join that movement because what I see in it is a lot of victimization and a lot of blame. So yes, I know I'm gonna probably catch some shit for this, but that's okay. I do not see men as the problem in this scenario. And I'm going to get to that in a little while when I talk about how to heal this pattern, because I'm going to share with you my orientation to what I've been through in the person that did some really horrible things to me, because I refuse to blame him, and I actually see him in a semi-positive light, as crazy as that sounds. Number 5 is you notice yourself getting into fights a lot, maybe even physical altercations. But if not physical, then it could definitely be bickering, fighting with loved ones, with family members, with your partner, your romantic partner, and in particular, perhaps blaming them for, again, this word blame. But I wanted to bring another sign or symptom in here, right? Like the fighting. So if you find yourself always in a lot of conflict and rarely in resolution, then chances are you're in some kind of blame and you want the other person to admit it or make amends. You don't want to give ground. You don't maybe want to, you don't want to give up anything. You want the other person to admit something, right, or change. So it's a tendency to look outward instead of inward. And this brings us to number 6, which is an inability or difficulty receiving hard feedback. Because your instinct, again, this is a nervous system pattern, so I have compassion for this. I used to have far more judgment than I do now. Your nervous system is prompting you to behave this way so you find safety. But your nervous system is, the minute maybe someone's giving you hard feedback, your nervous system is like, I got this. I'm kicking in here. They are the problem, not you. Right? That's kind of what your nervous system is telling you. And if this is happening below the level of your awareness, it's going to be really challenging to recognize it, pause and go, I'm going to listen to them and see if it lands, see if it fits for me, see if I believe it about myself, because they're entitled to their opinion. So if it feels challenging for you to have kind of equanimity and openness to someone else's opinion of you, knowing that you don't have to take it as fact, you don't have to even believe them, but maybe you should listen because maybe there's something in there for you to learn. It's not about right or wrong, right? So if you find yourself having a hard time receiving feedback, it has also to do with what I mentioned in the last point, which is typically looking outward for blame and responsibility and accountability, and having a challenging time looking inward. And I'm not going to make this a separate point, but I am going to end on this, just kind of wrapping it up here for signs and symptoms, that this is one of the trickiest parts of breaking this pattern, because your nervous system might try to convince you that none of this is your fault and it has to be someone else's. And so if you turn inward, it might even trigger a reaction against you, your higher self. Your nervous system might actually react against your consciousness, the conscious you that is now saying, no, I choose now to take responsibility and hold myself accountable. But your nervous system might go, oh, no, you don't. And so it can be difficult to break. So how do you break this pattern? Well, number 1, you have to admit that you have this pattern in order to break it. And this is one of the more challenging patterns to admit to, in my experience, as I just mentioned. So that is step number 1. Assess the signs and symptoms, assess your life, be radically honest with yourself if you want to break this pattern, and then admit if this is you. That is step number 1. Number 2 is to decide to take total ownership over your life, your emotions, your nervous system, your psyche, your mind, your mindset, your body, everything. Be accountable and decide that that's who you want to be. And it may not be, and that's totally fine. I leave you free. But I promise you, as someone who went through something really, really traumatizing, holding myself accountable has been the best thing I could have done. And it's gotten me to greater and greater and greater levels of freedom than I imagined was even possible for me this lifetime. So take ownership, be accountable. Even if you could claim the victim card because something happened to you, like like what happened to me. Even if you were, raped, even if you were abused, even if you went through something extremely traumatizing, and, you technically have the right to call yourself a victim. However, it's just not a great energy to live in, I don't think. It's disempowering to you, and the only person it really hurts is you. The victimization and then the blaming of other people doesn't do a whole lot to make your life better. At least from my observation of people that I know who play the victim or have this victim pattern. And it certainly has been my experience that doing the opposite has led to the kind of life and person and, everything that I want for myself. Number 3 is to swap your typical reactivity, that habituated urge to blame, to get in fights, to, deflect or make the other person wrong. Swap that for curiosity. And honestly, this really should have been a bullet point or a number in all of the nervous system pattern videos that I've done, but it just occurred to me in this one, really looking at it, because it's something I can give you that could help you kind of get a Trojan horse into that nervous system pattern, right? So that your nervous system actually allows you to interrupt this pattern and change it. And curiosity is a superpower. It's impossible to be in a nervous system pattern if you're curious, because curiosity implies uncertainty, that you don't know everything. It implies, playfulness perhaps, or intellectual interest. It implies that you want to learn something new, right? That's usually why we're curious. So if you swap curiosity, exchange the reactivity for curiosity in those situations, you're going to learn something new about yourself and perhaps other people and the people you're in relationships with. So this, bullet point of breaking the pattern is going to come in really handy for you in those moments where you might be prone to getting in a fight or having a lot of conflict, right? Anytime you get triggered into blame. So first you're like, oh, there I am again, right? Okay, curious. What's going on in me, like right now? Why am I blaming them? How can I take accountability right now? Is there something I could get curious about in the other person? Because you might be reacting to a person in your life now who's not actually abusing you, or a perpetrator or a predator, or someone you really ultimately want to blame in that way, but you're acting out that old pattern on them or with them due to reactivity, due to that habituated pattern, right? So if you can get curious about those people in your life, whether it's a boss, a partner, right, your family, friends, whatever, the world, the system, then you can learn something. You could learn something, and learning something new about what you typically blame can begin to interrupt the pattern. Number 4, and this is bound to be the controversial one I mentioned earlier, so I'm circling back around here. Number 4 is to find some good in whoever you typically have blamed. And in particular, this one is useful for the past, right? For whoever we've blamed in the past, or if it's a system we're blaming now that we think is corrupt or wrong. But it has been my experience that the people who tend towards victimization as a nervous system pattern tend to grow up into the adults that become perpetrators. Not always. So there are kind of 2 camps. You're either going to be that, or you're going to probably really collapse inward and, I don't know, probably feel really stuck in life and have a lot of blame. I say this because I truly believe, for example, the man that did what he did to me when he was 30, 31, he was a drug addict, And what I know about drug addiction now is that addicts are some of the most traumatized people in our society. It means, to me, I don't know exactly what happened in his childhood. I don't need to know. I don't need to find out. But based on what I know about the signs and symptoms of trauma, I believe he was once an extremely traumatized person. He was once a baby. He was once an innocent baby who couldn't even talk, right? So how did somebody like that grow up into a man that at 30 or 31 could turn to a 13-year-old, psychologically manipulate for 6 months and groom in such a way that, my mind was turned inside out. I didn't know who to trust. And then, and he seemed like such a funny, cool guy at a time when I was lonely, right? This is usually how this story goes. And then all hell broke loose and he became a monster, basically. But how does a person turn into that, right? I believe it's because at some point he went through something really traumatizing, had no resources to deal with it, turned to drugs and alcohol, and became, a little psychotic. Like, I believe he had all the classic signs of a psychopath, actually. So how can I find good in him? Well, by tracing this story all the way back, I can, when I think about a baby, a nameless baby, a baby that's brand new in the world, it probably just wants to be loved and held like anyone else, I believe we all start off there. I'm much more, of the belief that it's our environment that creates our psychology and creates our biology, much more than genetics. So epigenetics is far more powerful, in my opinion. So something created this person to be this way. And I know from personal experience, having been through that trauma myself, that I could have turned to drugs and alcohol. I could have, become addicted to other things. It could have been a lot worse for me. I contemplated killing myself. So, but I didn't. But how can I have compassion for this person, who did this to me? And I personally believe that's one of the secret ingredients to why I feel so free. I feel so free. Like I don't have blame. I'm living my life. I'm grateful for everything I've been through, including that. Would I wish it on someone? Of course not. But that was my life. That was life happening for me, and I got to decide what to do with it. So finding the good in a person, in whether they're in the past and they're no longer in your life, you can do it in an imaginative way, but there has to be some good. If I were to do this at like a surface level and not tracing it back, I might say, well, he was really funny, he made me laugh, et cetera, et cetera. I would like to see a world in which everyone who experiences trauma finds the support they need to heal and to use what happened to them to evolve and move forward. And if that had been available to him, he wouldn't have done what he did to me. But that didn't happen. So I'm the person that gets to do that now. And how do I do that? By releasing the blame, acknowledging that, it's not, I'm not condoning, but acknowledging that some, suppressed or unhealed pain is causing this person to commit evil acts, if you want to call it evil. So how can you find some good in whatever it is that you're blaming? This is one of the most freeing things I can offer you. And also, I understand one of the most difficult. So to wrap this one up, I know this was getting a little long. To wrap this one up, often I find that it is the evil in me that prevents me from seeing the good in what I label evil out in the world. And if I'm able to see the good in what I label as evil out in the world, I feel free. The scales have been balanced, so to speak. It's and I haven't repressed something in me that would then cause me to become a perpetrator or, to become the thing that I despise. All right, number 5 is to find the gifts in whatever experiences you've been through that have you feeling victimized. For me, I can look back on what I went through as a teenager, and given the crazy circumstances that it was, I developed a heightened awareness, a keen sense of observation. I notice patterns, like I have a crazy strong pattern recognition, I think more than most people. And this has allowed me to be exceptional in my field, working in a private practice with people in pain. I notice minute things that they do with their face, and then I can ask them about it, and it helps me actually tune into them. I notice, what their body's doing. I feel things, and I speak to them. And I truly believe those skills were actually created and honed in this 2.5-year experience of living a lie, not knowing who to trust, observing. Like I went inward, but then I observed my environment to figure out how to get out. So I just became a keen observer and began to recognize patterns, both in myself and in, the man, and then in my life and at school, and how all these things were interplaying. And I was trying to manage a lot for a teenager. But now that skill serves me exceptionally well. There are many other gifts too. I think one of the biggest that I can see is that people who go through traumas or abuse tend to, if they can move through it in a healthy way, tend to have some of the greatest depths of compassion for other people that I know. So I have a lot of compassion and capacity for being with people in pain. Not a lot shocks me, so I can sit and listen to your story, even though it might shock other people. It won't shock me, and I feel like I can, hold space for a broader and greater diversity of people than maybe other practitioners could. And on and on and on. There are so many gifts that I've gotten. I just wanted to give you a few examples of mine to perhaps spark your own exploration. I promise that there are gifts in whatever happened in your life that has caused you to feel like a victim, if you're willing to go looking for them. And finally, number 6, and this feels really important, and it's to cultivate self-compassion. But I'm going to expand on that and make it a bit broader and deeper. I think self-compassion is extremely important for all of us, right? But obviously, if you feel victimized and you tend to blame others, there's some need or longing here, I believe, for someone to come along and tell you, they're going to take care of you, that you're going to be okay, that the bad guys are taken care of. You don't have to worry. They've got you, they're looking out for you. And, or I admit I was wrong. Like I admit, like I did something wrong. That's maybe you're craving that too, to hear that from somebody. You can become those voices for yourself, those voices and those energies. So, and I believe those are acts of compassion. So I didn't want to just say, be compassionate, have compassion for yourself. I want to actually give you something you can do. So, you may need to turn inward and literally tell yourself, either in writing in a letter or in your own mind or verbally out loud, that you've got it. You've got you. You're going to take care of everything now, that you're here, and you're going to hold everybody accountable. And holding people accountable is awesome. That's different than blame, right? And then at the same time, when you begin to hold yourself accountable, you're actually giving yourself the thing you think you want from someone else. But actually, if you're willing to give this to yourself, that is the ultimate pattern interrupt for this particular pattern, is if you are willing to hold yourself accountable and say, you know what, and say it compassionately and mean it, you know what, I've done a lot of this to myself. Like I didn't do that, the thing that happened to me, but I've kept myself stuck. I caused conflict. I have blamed other people. And that hasn't led to the greatest relationships or quality of life for myself. And that's okay. I forgive myself. It makes sense why I did that. And I don't need to do that anymore, right? So these are just a few offerings I have for you of words or scripts you can start with, but obviously you want to find your own words. All right, whew. So this feels like a really big one. It felt, just a little out of my depth. Like I had to go to Stefan and a few other people and just really dig within. So I'd love to hear from you now. Are you somebody who plays the victim? I'm asking this very compassionately. I promise not to judge you. I very rarely do that anymore. I'm not going to claim I never do. It's just like usually it's the people in extreme forms of blame and refusal to take responsibility. If you're here watching this all the way at the end, I guarantee you I'm not going to judge you. So I'd love to hear from you. I'll get in the comments. If you have any questions about this, let me know. This feels like such an important and powerful topic to even have a conversation about, given the state of the world right now, because there's a lot of blame going around, for the system we're in, or certain people who have a lot of money or power who are pulling the strings or whatever. So that's something we can all look at as well, if we're doing that and participating in it. So please share your comments below. I hope this was helpful for you if you are someone who struggles with that victim nervous system pattern. Thank you so much for watching. Please share this with anyone you think could benefit, and I will see you next time.